says to that report. Could I just ask that when you're reading it, I'd advise reading it on the desktop version rather than printing it. Reason being that it's been designed and crafted to be read online due to the fact that we're intending not to print it in line with some of the values of that climate action plan. When you print it, you'll see that it prints out in A3 and it is huge. So yeah, up to you if you do choose to print it, but I would advise reading it on your laptops. Cool. So kia ora. So stepping into the Heritage Strategy Review space. So today we're going to work you through some of the work that was done during as a request from the long-term plan. So the purpose of today's presentation, so during long-term plan deliberations, there was a request that from elected members that officers complete a desktop high-level review of the heritage strategy to determine if it is still fit for purpose. The workshop today provides in detail some of the feedback and response that we've received from doing that review in advance of the council meeting 11th of December for decision. From today's briefing, we would really like you to inform us and confirm the direction council officers ahead of the review coming out at that council meeting. Specifically for the questions we're asking you today, we want to know if you agree with the current recommendation of officers being to retain the strategy but not undertake any additional work at present. So we'll work through what that means in today's presentation and also some additional commentary about the actions at the end. Talking about the triangles, so we're in the do phase. We want you to give us feedback, direction, ideas and guidance about the heritage strategy review. While we're working through as well, please feel free to stop me for any questions, otherwise I'll just continue to flow as we work through. For some background, talking about heritage, we love the background. So the strategy was formally adopted at the 5th of September meeting back in 2012. At this time, the purpose of the strategy was to assist the council and community to effectively engage and manage heritage within Horowhenua District. What this meant for the strategy itself was that it guided through council's direction around how we manage heritage within Horowhenua and some additional actions and steps that were presented. To kind of assist you with how we're going to work through the presentation, we thought we'd be upfront about the options that we'll present to the council meeting on the 11th of December. So of those four, we're working through the option to repeal the strategy, the option to update the strategy, the option which is the officer's recommendation about retaining the strategy, but enabling that there is no further work to implement the remaining strategy actions as directed. But that of the ones that we're not implementing, they will be implemented through additional pathways, with the example of Foxton Futures being amended through the work that is going on in that space. Don't know if you want to, Debbie.
So when we say retain the strategy but with no further work to implement the remaining strategy actions, we mean not necessarily packaging up specific heritage work, but that we continue to explore other work streams as an opportunity to continue to embody the spirit of the strategy and give weight to it in that way. So an example would be through Foxton Futures, for example, to continue to enhance and celebrate the identity and the heritage identity of Foxton, particularly bringing in the tourism lens through those sorts of pathways rather than sort of a dedicated heritage action strategy.
Cool. And then lastly, about the option to retain the strategy and direct the unimplemented actions to be prioritised. So those four will be presented at council meeting, but keen for any feedback and discussion today. In terms of what the officers did, so the scope of our review was to do a high-level desktop review by officers, and we examined the opportunities, the challenges, the vision and goals of the heritage strategy that was identified. We also worked through and determined which actions of the strategy have already been completed, so you'll see that at the end of the attachments, and then also the ones that are potentially ongoing or have been redirected or repurposed. Of that work, for the vision, goals, challenges and opportunities, we'll recognise that there was lots of considerable work that has been done in this space and wanted to recognise the value that heritage is already speaking to within our district and the desire to recognise, protect and enhance it. For the actions, we've worked through in a little bit more detail, but you'll see that there's some general terms around identifying and protecting these actions, with some of them being more urgent than other ones.
So the sort of the themes within the strategy and the actions can kind of be grouped into a couple of categories. Ones that are the time sensitive ones because they're around protecting further loss of heritage, and those actions have largely been completed through things like Plan Change 1 that identified additional heritage items in the district. There are another sort of category of actions that are around celebrating and enhancing, and those are the ones where, for the most part, I guess less priority had been given to implementing those actions, but because those are more around celebrating and enhancing and not about protecting against further loss, I guess they had less time-driven elements associated with them. So yeah, just to sort of keep that in mind. But in terms of the high-level direction of the strategy, the vision and the goals element, that largely still aligns with statutory direction, being around protecting, celebrating and enhancing heritage. So sort of at a strategic level, the guiding philosophy is still well aligned with what's required by legislation. And in terms of the actions, those ones around protecting against further loss have been completed, but with some elements around the celebrating and enhancing not yet complete.
And just to provide some additional context and connection to some other work programs that Council are doing, so I've touched on the Foxton Beach program. Probably also just want to touch on the work that our team are also doing around the Sites of Significance Plan Change. So this is also enabling and connected with the heritage strategy, and you'll see that that's reflected in some of the action table at the end. So while there's connections to also, sorry, I'll stick to the slides. There's connection also to the community wellbeing strategy and the need to protect and recognise the role that heritage plays within our cultural and environmental outcomes. And just reflecting on the long-term plan, so I just wanted to touch on that through this process, there was no specific budget for progressing heritage initiatives. And so if the decision of Council is to reprioritise that work, there's probably some space around what our team and the district plan budget are currently doing to enable that to happen. But yeah, through the long-term plan, there's no specific budget to provide funding for heritage initiatives. And then connecting to our community outcomes and our priorities. So you'll obviously understand that the heritage strategy directly aligns with our partnership with Tangata Whenua and also our strong communities. And then also touching on our top 12 priorities, while it is not directly supportive of any of those 12s, it is linked to and connected to our priority 3 and priority 10. Cool. So moving on to our recommendations. So keen to get any feedback, start some dialogue and see what you guys are thinking about the heritage strategy in itself. But that due to the work that's been done in the background and the connection to existing work programs, the officers see that the strategy should be retained in its current form, but that potentially we don't prioritise this over some of the other district plan work. Cool. So keen to get some feedback and dialogue.
Just whereabouts is the progress in terms of the work around Wahitapu and the sites of significance? Where are we at in that piece of work?
So in around about August or September, we had an initial meeting with the Murapuku Tribal Authority and to talk about what a process might look like. We have also last week, at the same time, we made an approach to Ngāti Raukawa who wanted to meet a little bit later. We've had an initial meeting with Neville, with the Te Tūmatakahoki Navigator, to introduce the project and start setting up connections about having a meeting with Te Tūmatakahoki members. And so we're just waiting for a date for that meeting. But the purpose of that meeting is to help us scope the plan change and determine what sort of support our iwi partners might need to participate in that plan change. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to have that meeting before the end of the year and be able to provide an update to elected members on what a process might look like, what a work program might look like, and what kind of timeframes will be involved. But what we can kind of take away from the kōrero that we've already had is a real eagerness to engage in that work stream. So feeling quite excited about the potential that plan change will have for getting better recognition of Wahitapu sites within the district plan.
David, I was just going to cover off that. So Justin and I, as part of the district plan steering group, met with officers to talk about the scope and the approach to this work stream. And so we came to a sort of a collective view on how to proceed. And I did send an email to all elected members with and so you might have, I'm not sure if you remember it, but just outlining our intended process, which included those steps, and that if there was any concerns or any things that we might have missed, to raise those. And I can assure you that so no one did raise any concerns about the approach. So officers are essentially implementing the approach that we discussed at that. So that I can resend that. Yeah.
I'm comfortable with your recommendation, with just a couple of things. Why? One is that it's not urgent. There's plenty of other priorities that we're doing, and I'd like to see some advancement on the work that I was part of that meeting as well. But yeah, so just progress that. We've been talking about that for a long time now, and it would be really good to progress that a little bit further ahead of this strategy. Plus, I'm conscious that we've really only got 6 or 7 months of this term left, and to try and push a great body of work out in that space of time is not going to be easy. So I'm comfortable that we identify, but don't go any further, to be honest.
Yep. So look, just a couple of points for me. First of all, absolutely respect the process by which funding was not allowed during the long-term plan. I get that. And I just bring a bit of a Foxton lens to it, predictably, because Foxton, is very much the heart of tourism and a lot of that. Can I continue? And a lot of that that history and a lot of the tourism is driven by the significant history of Foxton, both historic in terms of its being a very early settlement, and also the built structure and so on. And so the heritage strategy, I guess what I just want to say today is that the heritage strategy, I think it would be good for there to be a very clear focus, a recognition, which is not currently really identified within the strategy, around the Foxton history and its built environment, particularly to the northern end of Main Street. There is so much there, and there's so much there to value. And there is an active Foxton Historical Society who is keen to engage and be part of the process. So it's not just about looking back and valuing our history, it's about earning some dollars in the process also. There are threats, with O2NL, there is a threat to Main Street Foxton as the first cab off the rank going north, and the pressures it could build in Main Street and what that might do to our heritage. And so I think there are opportunities from that threat through the district plan to look at this business of a heritage precinct, an idea that's been floated in the past, that we actually through the district plan process put a value around and some conditions around northern Main Street so that area is preserved for the future also. And I just end by saying that, in terms of optimism, I see real value in the community plan which is there and which absolutely values our heritage as one of its key themes around community. So I think that will be the conduit, and I think that was referenced, and thank you for that. That'll be one of the means by which we can work as a community to value our heritage. Thank you. Jonathan, you might want right of reply.
In some way I disagree with you. A heritage strategy should be thinking about heritage across our district as a whole. We have many unique and special parts of our district that all need to be recognised, and just saying that there's one heritage precinct in one location in our district devalues any idea of adhering to heritage or heritage strategies in our district. I think the existing strategy already identifies in 4 or 5 locations across the district by the photos that's in there anyway.
So I think we need to do, if we were going to pay attention to it and do more work on it, we need to think about those areas across the whole district. And in some ways, I agree with you. You know, Foxton already values its heritage. Maybe we need to increase our heritage value across the district and other areas as well, and recognise some of those other communities which have valuable assets and invest in and support them more than Foxton, who are already doing so much.
Just guys on the back of what Councillor Allen said, and I haven't read the strategy for a little while, but I'm not sure it's not clear to some property owners that I've had discussions, Lauren, you're aware of those discussions, around the difference between actual heritage buildings and heritage overlay, which is what Foxton, a great deal of Foxton's actually heritage overlay, not pure heritage by law or whatever it might be. Can you just sort of touch on that and then just remind me whether how that's addressed in the strategy or if...
Sure. So the heritage strategy sort of informed some district plan work that followed both through the district plan review and then through a subsequent plan change to the district plan. And the result of those two streams of work were, I guess, two categories of how heritage is recognised and protected in the district plan. The first being protection of particular heritage buildings and sites, and that's where this building or this site on its own is of such significance that it's worthy of protection in its own right. And often, but not always, that aligns with buildings that are identified on Pohiri-Tonga, the Heritage New Zealand list. The other way that areas of heritage can be recognised and are recognised in the district plan is where, say, a group of buildings collectively or a group of facades collectively have heritage value, and we've identified and protected that through the use of a heritage overlay. And so in the Foxton Main Street, the heritage overlay goes as far as Avenue Road. And so some buildings within that overlay are specifically protected as individual heritage items, but if they're not individually protected as heritage items, everything within that overlay has an element of protection in the sense that it's identified in the district plan as being part of this sort of collective group of value. There are objectives and policies about enhancing that, and there are requirements that if you modify the facade or you build a new building, replace the building, that you do so in a manner that kind of gives a nod to and recognises the group of buildings that it's a part of. So it's slightly, the overlay, I guess, is a more sort of encouraging tool than a restrictive one, and that it doesn't sort of mean that you need to get, that it doesn't have that sort of individual building protection, but recognises that value can also be derived from the setting and the broader streetscape in which a building is located.
So having heard that, David, can you just clarify, so what's the outcome you're seeking in a Foxton Main Street context? Because the question I was about to ask the team was, if we're ready now to do that small piece of the puzzle, acknowledging what just Jonathan said about the broader thing, could we advance some of that work through the omnibus district plan change?
Yes, so when I talked about the heritage precinct model, it was about having much firmer rules, having much clearer, more codified rules, if you like, examining that as an option. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep, I understand the direction there, but we'd probably need to explore a little bit more the detail about what that meant, so we could advise whether that could fit within the omnibus plan change or whether that would need to be a separate plan change and where that might sit in terms of priority.
In terms of process too, I was thinking through the Foxton Futures mechanism, through the community-driven sort of, this is what we think it should look like. So I don't see it as a piece of urgent work that needs to be part of an omnibus thing. It's about doing it once, getting it right.
Appreciate that, because I just wanted to just test it, because we want to keep the omnibus quite tight, and we're trying to focus on quick wins. So rather, it sounds like that there might need to be some more further thinking. So yeah, that's fine.
And I think in terms of a sequence of events, the Foxton Futures and the Community Plan and the Shannon Community Plan as well are both opportunities to be able to have those conversations with the community about the value that they place on those heritage overlay areas, those heritage precincts, as they're called now under the new National Planning Standards Framework. And if that message is coming through from those communities, to then devise a set of actions from there that could involve further district plan work to better protect or celebrate those areas.
Just my 2 cents is supporting to what me Bernie said, and grateful that Sam reminded us of some of those other pieces of work that are occurring alongside what we're doing here, and value also, David, your staunch protection of Foxton and our beautiful Foxton heritage. But I'm with Jonathan too. It does need to have a district lens over it in time. But I also very clear we don't have the resourcing right now to dedicate it. So the work that is occurring for me is good. Little steps, right direction, getting it right. The only thing I would encourage us probably is where we can try and find some resourcing through Heritage New Zealand or whatever avenue is out there to actually assist in time someone actually doing some dedicated work in this regard, because one thing I've learned about heritage in our district is when it's gone, it's gone. Recognising for me is not enough. Recording is more appropriate, and I just think we need some other measures and tools that we're ensuring we're capturing, recording and maintaining those records for future, not just what's still with us today. So thank you.
I'll make a comment. This is more of a comment about heritage strategies. I mean, with heritage strategies, we always sort of drill down and focus on buildings and then what the buildings look like at a particular colonial period of time, which I think devalues the idea of increasing heritage value across our district as well. I mean, it would be nice to see a strategy that builds upon the history of this district and a bit more, from the 1,000-year history all the way through to the 200-year history, recognising Māori and Pākehā and some of that history and some of the historical events that happened in our district, and there are numerous, aren't recognised by a colonial building or a colonial structure. So it'd be nice to have that aspect of a heritage strategy built in there rather than just going back to some planning and building concept as well. But obviously we're not going to be doing much over the next little while anyway. Thanks.
Cool. So thank you all for your feedback and advice. We'll be definitely taking that all on board, and I think that gives us in a good little steadway for the council report that'll be coming out. So yeah, look forward to that discussion with you all then.
So we're running a few minutes ahead, so we might just need to organise a few people to get here sooner than they thought they were going to be.
Caro, you ready to go? Cool. Let's get into it.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon everybody. As we start, this presentation that we're about to show you is in your portal, so some of it may be easier to see on your small screen. So I'm here today with Jacinta and Peishan as we continue on the early stages of the annual plan, with today being the last step before we come to Council on the 11th of December to seek a decision to progress with budgets that will be presented to you then, and to progress with proposed changes to fees and charges. To inform that, today we share further work that has been done on budgets to reach a maximum of 9.9% rates increase for 25-26 and to discuss proposed changes to fees and charges. In doing so, what we seek from you today is for you to give us feedback about the information that we'll share, and to provide any further direction you would like us to take before that 11th of December council meeting. As mentioned, we'll seek a decision about proceeding with budgets presented then. That will inform whether consultation is required or not. And a reminder, it's required if there are significant or material changes from the LTP, not required if there are not. But a note also that whether or not we do consult, we will be still engaging early with the community about proposed rates increases to give people more time to plan for the change. For the feedback and direction that we seek, we first note that Council has decisions to make about BIRM separately next week, which may have an impact on budgets. But today we ask, are you comfortable with the budgets and proposed rates increases that will be discussed today? Is there anything else that we should be modelling or considering before we ask for that decision on the 11th of December? Then putting this in context about where we are headed with the annual plan and how it fits with some other pieces that we are looking at. We'll take your direction from today and draft the council paper for the 11th of December. On that journey, we will take note of any decisions next week that may have an impact on that and incorporate that into that paper as well. We then progress with preparing information and continuing work on the annual plan before heading into 2025 when there are a number of pieces of consultation. Local waters bylaw, the water services delivery plan, fees and charges, some that we'll discuss today do need to be consulted on, and provision of information to ratepayers about the rates increase if we are not actually consulting.
Sorry, Caro, just if we decide that we are going to consult on the annual plan, can the local water done well be done at the same time, or are they two separate pieces?
I think there are a number of councils that are doing them at the same time.
With that, we'll head into the detail and I'll pass over to Jacinta and Peishan.
Thank you. So we've done quite a bit of work across the organisation since the last workshop, and we'll talk you through what's happened since then. There's a couple of bits to this presentation. We'll talk you through the fact that we are now at a position that proposes a revised rates increase after accounting for growth of 9.2%. So hopefully that is a good position. And then we will also talk you through some other options, taking into account what we think might happen next week, and also some other ones that we wanted to talk through with you. So in terms of where the LTP rates increase had us was 9.9. Last workshop that had increased to 11.6. And through more detailed work, we've been able to bring that back to 9.2%. This slide I'm not going to talk to in detail, but is there to provide you that understanding of what had driven the original 9.9% that was included in the year 2 average rate increase for the LTP.
noting that the most significant part of it is around the winding out of the debt-funded operating costs and making sure that we're fully funding depreciation. So in terms of the changes that we have made, we've been able to come up with a proposal to reduce 0.4 million out of the budget, which is a reduction of 0.7 to that 9.2. And that in terms of where we've gotten to since the last workshop, we've been able to decrease by 2.4%. So some of the key reasons why, and we'll talk through this a little bit more in the next slides, is slowing down the investment in destination management. So that we had planned in year 2 of the LTP to have some more resource and also to invest some more to get some revenue out in the market. Lisa's here in case you want to talk through that in detail, but we are proposing to slow that down, so there will be one resource that will continue on for the first part of the year, but that is planned to then be recruited in the second part of the year. In terms of detail across the business, all budget lines have been reviewed in detail. Things like sundry expenses, other expenses, significant amount of work has been led by Rachel across the organisation to make sure that every single line that's there is needed. And we've looked at, in particular, over the last couple of years, what we've been spending just to make doubly sure that everything that's in there we really need. In addition to that, the waste minimisation levy, there is an strong indication that we will get quite a bit more money from the waste minimisation levy. In the past, we've used that to fund recycling. But with that additional funding that's there, the conversation for the table today is around using a portion of that, and it's currently proposed to be 2/3 or 453,000 to help to reduce rates, so effectively offset additional recycling and costs in the solid waste activity. And as well, we've looked at our fees and charges and looked at areas where we can potentially look to increase the revenue assumptions for next year. So this is a view, and please jump in and ask questions at any point that you would like to. This is a view for you in terms of what the year 2 LTP budget was, what it was proposed to be in the second workshop, and then now what we're indicating the change will be. And then the final column here is an indication of a change since the last workshop. So if it works, I'll just step through each item and you can ask questions as we go. So in the fees area, we've indicated that in terms of the trade waste bylaw, because it will be coming in, that it is reasonable to assume there will be some increase in the level of trade waste revenue that we receive. We have been relatively conservative because it will take time for that to come in, but we think it conservatively it is reasonable to put in an extra sort of $50,000 in that space. So that's the key change there. In the user charges area, there is an assumption that we can increase the swim school funding by 50,000. So that is the key reason for that change in here. To offset that, though, in looking at some of our utility connection fees over the last couple of years and doing that detailed review, we've probably been a bit bullish in terms of the revenue assumptions there. So that's been brought back to be a bit more in line with where actuals have been over the last few years. One area that is a possible favourable point that we need to monitor is that going forward with the council taking on more connections in that utility space, is that's a revenue stream that we hope will start to increase in the future, but there isn't enough certainty on it at this stage to probably rely on it. In terms of in the last workshop, we'd indicated that we would have a reduction in the revenue because of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs funding reducing. We also discussed as part of that workshop that if the funding needs to decrease, then ultimately we'll need to reduce our resource or spending in that space as well, so that there is we're not spending any more than we're receiving. So that is the assumption. That's why the net spending has come down in that space. And then lastly, in the other revenue space, we've We had a conversation at the last workshop about commercial properties, and I think Councillor Jennings, you may have asked a question around if we've got this additional commercial revenue, then why are we spending so much?
It was twofold, because I think there was a question around whether we should be, for town centre related commercial properties, whether we should be ring fencing and hypothecating the revenue back to town centre projects, given they're essentially these properties are going to be short term hold. And so I don't know if we actually made a call on that, but hopefully we're going to discuss that at some point. But yeah, the other question was, or the other part of that was, I think the expenditure assumption was something like 100 grand across all those properties, and so there was just a question mark over why would we be spending so much again for properties we were short term hold. But I think Lacey undertook to go away and do some thinking about what's the bare minimum spend. Yeah.
Thanks. So she has done that, and you'll see when we get to the expenditure slides, we've effectively left the revenue in there, but we've scaled back the expenditure to the minimum that we can have in that space reasonably. The key change in this other revenue area is what I mentioned just before, though, is in relation to the waste minimisation levy, is the fact that do elected members think it's reasonable to use a portion of that additional waste minimisation levy to increase the amount of funding that goes towards reduces the amount of rates, basically?
So my initial reaction to that one is yes, but I would, rather than the 2/3 going just on recycling, because we split the solid waste into 3 separate rates, didn't we? I've forgotten. I feel like a portion of that needs to go to the one that's district wide in terms of the waste minimisation one, as opposed to just the recycling, which only benefits the people that are receiving recycling. So yes, there should be a big chunk of that going to the recycling one, but there should also be a chunk that ensures district-wide benefit, because the district is paying the levy. District-wide is paying the levy in terms of use of disposal. So does that make sense in terms of?
It does make sense. Thanks. We'll work on that in terms of that split and making sure that doesn't throw anything out in terms of what's allowed under the rules in terms of that levy. But absolutely, I hear what you're saying. Does anyone else? Is there an objection to looking at that from the table? Okay. Before I move on to the next slide, looking at more of the expenditure side, does anyone have any questions in relation to the revenue side of things?
Not a question for me, but just going back on that final point, I probably want to understand what that looks like before we make the decision about how that's reprioritise that money. I actually want to know what the impact is on the strategies we're already working on. If we're going to reallocate the pool in such a way, what are we not going to be able to complete that we've already got you set on a direction for? And I'm also about cost recovery of those that make the largest contribution of waste to our district. So not sure where that fits in. So yeah.
So maybe if we have Rob or Daniel next time, if one of them isn't here today, to talk about what that, so just to make sure I've got that clear, in terms of if that 450,000 was used towards rates in the solid waste activity, depending, and it can be split in whichever way, is understanding what waste minimisation activities could potentially go ahead if there wasn't a decision to use that to reduce rates. Is that correct?
That's a part of it. The other part of it is because I could almost support that fund being allocated to reduce our rates. I get that, but then what am I losing from that? And then if we're going to reallocate what's left minus that 450, then how do we ensure we prioritise that's left over to carry out the work that we're actually wanting to progress, prioritise, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Sure, yeah. And I think that was what Daniel was intending with the remaining amount, is that decision around what is the priority of what we want to do in that space, because there hasn't been a lot of conversation yet about what specific projects want to go ahead. And there is still some waste minimisation levy left over from this last financial year, so we can, when we bring that forward, we can talk about the overall balance that's left in that levy fund. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Jacinta. This might sound like a dumb, non-financial question, but reduced funding for Mayor's Task Force jobs. Surely we're not then, what we get in, we spend, right? So that to me is, equal on both sides of the equation. So actually making less spending doesn't seem as though it's going to actually have a positive effect on what we're going to do. It just didn't sound right to me.
Thanks. It was in the last workshop, we talked about it being an increase required in rates because we were getting less funding. So what we've done effectively now is zeroed it. If we've got less funding, we can spend less. So we've balanced the two out to the way it should be. You're right. Yeah.
And apologies, this one's a bit small, but I know you've got it in your portal, so hopefully you can see it in there.
In terms of the overall employee costs, they've been looked at. I just wanted to highlight, in terms of the assumptions, they are the same as the long-term plan assumptions and the same that they were for this year, as a 3.5% average increase has been assumed. The main change in this area is just due to some changes in the timing of when people will come on board, rather than specifically changing any other roles in the organisation. So there are no new roles in the organisation assumed, other than the destination management one, but that is planned to come on a little bit later. In terms of training, we talked about this one briefly last time, but the intention here is that we will scale the training back to match the level that we've got for this year. So we did increase our training budgets for this year. So we had planned that they'd increase a little bit more, but at this stage now we're planning to keep them the same.
Training? Because training's been one of those things that has been a low-hanging fruit, and certainly like council over the last few years that I've been around, we have been consistently chipping or holding to training at this kind of level. And so I just want to understand the impact, like operational impact, if we continue to just kind of cap you, because like training and investing in our people is important, but obviously there's got to be some balance given the financial climate. But are you able to just, without getting into too many specifics, like what is the impact of reducing the budget by that amount? Like what do we miss out on? Or what does the team miss out on?
Maybe what I can do is give you a sense of what our programs are looking like for this year. So at the moment we are developing a leadership development framework for the organisation so that our leaders within the organisation have got a clear pathway in terms of key leadership competencies that are expected of them, that they need to develop across the spectrum of leadership. So that program is being developed and will be rolled out starting in the second half of the year. So we're structuring up the programs that are being offered a lot more in that space. And then there is the offerings that go across the business in terms of specific technical training that different professional competencies might need. And then we are offering in that leadership development one as well, some online learning as well for the team. So we're comfortable in that space that we're doing enough in terms of development to continue to cap it at the level that we increased to for this year. Without too much impact. We haven't, though, as you can see in the last couple of years, been spending up to what our training budget is. We've probably made sacrifices to offset some of the savings across the organisation. So we are very likely to spend our full budget, but we're working up to the development of the programs that make sure that we can support that well.
Sorry, because I'm not right in thinking that we used to budget per $1 per staff member, and I would imagine now it's a lot more targeted and a lot more, it's not across the board like it used to be, that we're actually focusing on the certain skill sets that we need in there.
We've got a specific, so a rough amount per person in each DM's budget that they can work on and allocate to their teams. And then we have a central amount that we then use to fund leadership development framework and other specific training that goes across the council.
Like, sorry, I don't want to labour the point on this, but like, because I'm just thinking we've taken Three Waters in-house people, more people, more technical people that will require ongoing training. And so, like, as long as we're confident that we're not setting you up to fail in terms of not being able to do what you need to do, like that was just my concern, is that yes, we want to find some savings, but yeah, I just want to be sure that we're putting you under pressure with additional people, additional skills that we need to maintain.
At this stage, we're comfortable within the Three Waters budget that was brought in house. They will effectively, within that money that we had for the alliance, that would have included money for training for that team. It will be a careful monitoring, and we'll continue to let you know. But at this stage, we're comfortable with where we're proposing. In terms of what we are proposing, though, is in the professional services space, and that is the same as the last one, is to remove the savings target. We think there are enough significant challenges for the organisation without having an additional $400,000 savings target, having been through the budgets in detail. And then across that, we've also then been through and found an additional $56,000 worth of savings in professional services across all of our team by looking at where we've spent over the last couple of years and where we know the programs need to be for next year. In the maintenance space,
Sorry, Jacinda, I noticed that, the actuals for 23-24 is against the budget for 24-25 against professional services is actually $1 million more. So, are we expecting a really bad year in terms of legal fees and other things like that this year? Because that seems like a significant increase on what the actuals were for 23-24.
now I don't know, I can't answer this perfectly well, but I know one significant one is in the district plan space, is that we have budgeted specifically for professional services related work and legal work for that specific project. So that is one of the most significant ones that drives that change in where the funding is. In terms of some maintenance, a few minor savings across the council. So you can see the descriptions there around the different facilities and where costs might need to be, maintenance costs across the organisation really. There's some additional costs in there as well as some offsets, but a net reduction of $35,000. In the other expenses area as well, we've been across the business and found approximately $63,000 in savings, and that's in those spaces. In terms of interest, Peishan and I have done very detailed work with our Treasury advisors in each single parcel of debt that we have and that we propose to have for next year. And we've landed at a position now with interest rates moving towards where they're expected to be, taking into account the changes that are expected to happen in the OCR, is that at this stage, we do need to increase our interest cost by $93,000. What that will do is that will make sure that our average cost of funds will sit at approximately 3.74%, which is a good average. So a key reason why it's needing to increase is that the loan from CIP, effectively the $12.5 million, will end up coming in next year rather than this year. So that average balance from the beginning to the end of the year is that effectively our beginning balance will end up higher in terms of the portion that's not interest free. So that does make a significant impact. For a year, it's approximately 500,000, the benefit of that interest free loan. So that's the key driver for that increased interest. As well, in this financial year, you'll see coming through the OPR is that pressure of up to 300,000 on our interest costs for this year because of not having that interest free loan kicking in when we had originally thought it would. Lastly, in terms of the conversation, is our internal labour recovery. We had some more conservative assumptions in our budget for year 2 for O2NL recoveries and other recoveries into capital projects, specifically in O2NL in the local water space, where some work's been done by the team to assess where realistically we should be recovering money from other sources for some of our team's time. And the most significant one in there is O2NL. So more work is happening in that space, but it's deemed reasonable that we can expect to recover that amount. Before I jump into this next slide, does anyone else have any questions or concerns?
Just a question about and sorry if you've already covered this, the 35,000 additional cost solid waste disposal costs. Was that reduced revenue from bags, or is it the Foxton transfer station that's driving that? Because the reason I'm asking that is because I'm hoping that then opens up a conversation around fees and charges, and to make sure that we're not sustaining that loss, and that we're not sustaining essentially a subsidisation of loss-making activities.
Anyone can jump in and correct me, but my understanding is both. So from the conversation last workshop, it was both, and I don't believe it's changed since then.
And Daniel's bringing back though some stuff around solid waste soon, isn't he? Is that some in the next couple of weeks? So presumably we've got we'll build some assumptions into this around where we land on that, or?
Yes, we can do. The intention of where we're at now is there may be changes to what we propose, but the ultimate thing we need to get to before Christmas is, does this on balance look to be in line with where the council is broadly comfortable progressing, so that we know whether we need to do any more detailed work and go out for prepare for consultation, or whether broadly we're in line with where you think we are. You're happy with where we are, so that we can finalize a budget that's along these lines. If there are some more minor changes that come through around solid waste, for example, then that could still change within the program that we've got. So now that leads us to 9.2. Some items which we thought may warrant a conversation, or you may have some thoughts about, is other things that we think may be a conversation or may happen. One of them is berm mowing. So what we've done is give you an indication of if the council, for example, made a decision in a different way around berm mowing and wanted to add some funding in, what would that look like in terms of rates? As well, in terms of the waste levy, there could be a conversation around using further levels of that waste minimisation levy and effectively using the full amount that we're planning to receive to help offset rates. There could be a further 227,000 that could go towards rates. The conversation you agreed to in year 1 of the LTP was to sell some of our carbon credits. That process is currently in progress. So there could be a conversation about selling more of those. That would pretty much use up, I think we had 600,000 worth of carbon credits at the time we prepared our annual report last year. They've since gone up in value, but effectively we could sell approximately 100,000 more in that space. And as well, lastly, there was some conversation about other options that we could investigate. One of those was around reducing cleaning across facilities, which could potentially contribute an extra $25,000 towards rates. anyone have any questions on any of those items or any additional ones that they'd like to add to the conversation?
Oh, sorry. So not to preempt the report on boom mowing that we're getting, the only way to pay for it is by increasing rates, essentially. There was some discussion around potentially finding other avenues to to pay for the boom mowing, but without seeing the report, it's obviously off the cards. It has to be funded by rates.
Thanks, Councillor Proctor. My understanding currently with the report is it's currently is looking at funding by rates and reintroduce the boom mowing to a level with some options there of what that level might look like.
So, in terms of
I don't think boom mowing is ever going to be fun.
In terms of the other ones, I guess it's just knowing what the implications are. I mean, reduce cleaning costs, if we can do that effectively without compromising the level of service too much, but it's hard to say yay or nay without understanding what that looks like. Brenda?
So with the cleaning costs, we're looking at this building predominantly, and it's not. It's more the back office, and some minor changes across our facilities that we shouldn't see a reduction in levels of service. We're not talking about changing the frequency, we're changing cleaning public toilets or anything like that.
If someone wants to comment on the carbon credits, if there's any downside to selling those, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there may be.
I guess in terms of the downside, from just one downside is if we use those to offset rates, for year 3, we already have a 10.1% rates increase planned for year 3. So anything that is used that isn't a long-term sustainable benefit will then increase the impact on year 3. So it's 150,000 could be used to then offset debt to give more capacity for other investment. We've got about I don't know, we'll talk about it in the next one of the other slides, but we've got about $10 million capacity in our debt currently in that long-term plan by the end of year 2. If you think about Fox and Beach freeholding account, which is $5 million, that's effectively sitting there against our debt at the moment because decisions haven't been made to use it. But if, for example, a decision was made to take that out of and put it into a separate deposit fund, which may be a conversation, there would be $5 million below our limit. So just to flag in terms of that debt conversation, that's one that you might weigh up around selling the carbon credits and using it for rates versus using it for debt.
Jacinda, in terms of those additional costs for insurance, energy, and other bits and pieces, I mean, the likelihood is we're going to see increases in that space, isn't it? We're not. I mean, we're now energy costs for a set period, and I'd imagine insurance, we're revisiting that. Well, we did it for this year. Is that set in stone as well, or for a couple of years, or is that still variable? Because looking at, that's a 0.4% saving between 9.2 and 8.8. There's a chance, in fact, that the 9.2 could increase with those extra costs.
It could do. We're just waiting on the last bit of our insurance now, so we've had everything back. Now we're looking to estimate what the impacts are for this, because it goes from it's a November period for our insurance, so we're just waiting to analyze that. The thinking, though, probably is around the insurance and the energy costs is that we'll need to manage with what we've got and find other ways, because we reach a point with the budgets where we are looking to you to seek approval about where you're comfortable to set those rates. And so if some of them come in a little bit later, then our assumption is that we'll need to manage within what we've got. But it's probably more to flag for you the ones that we haven't quite got the level of certainty on yet. Interest was probably the one we really wanted to make sure of before we got to today, which we've been able to do, which is good. But the others, I think, we can manage.
Ring fence for it's not capital projects, is it? So what if we didn't proceed with that, what happens to that 227 at the moment?
What would happen with it is it would sit there on our balance sheet as we received it to be used for waste minimization, specific waste minimization projects, which have yet to be confirmed.
So OPEX for waste minimisation related activities.
Yes, or they could. I'm not certain. Some of them could be capital projects as well. Probably.
I don't know. David McMillan might want to comment about whether you can use waste minimisation for capital projects. I'm not certain on that one. Yes, you can. I'm getting a nod there. So they are ones that have not yet specifically been decided by the table.
So I'm probably a little bit like what Justin expressed before. Is I'm comfortable with the 2/3 being used to offset rates across the two different target rates in terms of recycling, and then I think it's district-wide minimisation. But that other third, given what we're doing at the Libin landfill and that there's some future decisions to be made still, I'm probably leaning towards not taking that as an additional rates decrease at this stage. Like, I don't think that would be sensible. I think we should just park it for now. That's just my gut reaction, but keen to hear others if there's different views.
Yeah, that is a thought we had, and that's a key reason why we left it sitting there, is not wanting to effectively take that on and to allow some flexibility for future decisions. So it's probably a good point with this slide and with the conversation we've just worked through, is to get a sense from the table of where your comfort levels are around what we've talked through and how comfortable you are with the level of rates at 9.2 that sits at. Would you like us to work through more of it? Because effectively what we'll be doing from this point today, we'll step through a little bit more of the capital and some of the assumptions and the fees in a minute. But broadly, this is one of probably the most significant items in terms of comfort levels that we would like to test the table with about, does 9.2 sit about right? Would you like it to be lower? If you would like it to be lower, are some of these ideas reasonable to you, or would you like some other work done? If you don't mind, it would be good just to test this bit with the table now.
So for me to consider it's 9.9 was signalled obviously in the LTP. 9.2 is a big drop, and it's a good bit of work. So I'm comfortable with that, because it was in the back of our minds that if we do go further, what's the catch up on that? You've still got the next following years to balance as well. So I think it sits quite nicely. And I think there's plenty of discussion around some of those things as well. You squeeze a little bit more perhaps, but again, I think 9.2 it's a pretty good signal. I'm pretty comfortable with it.
I'm liking the 8.8 up there. Yeah. I mean, we inflicted a certain amount of pain on our community last year, so any relief we can give them would be a good thing, I think.
I think he's done a great job in pulling it back I'm certainly a lot more comfortable around the 8.89 than the 9.9. I don't have any comfort level for selling off any further carbon credits. I'll just put that out there. And I'm really interested in those negotiations you have around our insurance and our energy costs. I just think we need to do so much more work in terms of how we negotiate those type of arrangements and get better outcomes for our community overall.
I'm comfortable where we sit there, Jacinda. I'm just conscious, though, that to do justice to the end result, that we possibly need to look at what it would mean if we did go, say, to 8% or something like that. Where is there anything, what are the impacts if we did investigate or explore that option? Acknowledging that you, in terms of the cost savings that you've said, we don't necessarily, or already in there. We did ask for 400k of savings, so I just, need to understand what that might mean if we did actually put those in. Because I don't want our community to just think that we've accepted that because it's lower or half of what we put in last year. I want us to justify probably a little bit more that what we're looking at is, is really a real deal type of thing. And look, we'll end up at 9.2, or in that range of where we sit now. But I think it's good to explore those other things. Is what I'm saying.
Just to test that, so in terms of the paper, would you like those options to be noted in there when we come back for the paper in December around?
Yeah, like we did last year, we said, if you want reduced rates to reduce further, these are the sorts of things that we're going to have to look at.
Mayor Bernie, if I could just contribute. So we've not done that work to date because that wasn't the guidance council gave us at the last workshop. You asked us to go away and come back around the 9.9 mark. We can add into the council report options for how we would further reduce the rates impact from, let's say, 8.8 or 9% down to 8%. But what I'd ask of the table is that you give us some guidance on what it is that, what is it you're wanting us to look into specifically? Because I suppose I'm nervous that I wouldn't want those options to be considered to be officer-led, which is, I suppose, some of the impression that has been given around the burn mowing conversation. So I think it's important as elected members you give us the guidance because we are talking level of service change. So to get down to 8%, that's where we need to bring those options like cancelling community grants and funding back on the table. So your guidance would be appreciated if that's what you'd like to see in the council report.
Yeah, look, I get what you're saying, but I suppose what I'm trying to justify to the community is that we are exploring with those other options and in terms of those levels of service. And if it does mean that we bring community funding grants back or further reductions in hours or, whatever, because I'm not sure what I'm asking you to look at in terms of those levels of service. I'm just wanting to ensure that our community is satisfied that we are exploring those options. I'm not suggesting that we need to get to 8% by any means, but what I am asking is that if we did get to 8%, these are the things that we would need to do to be able to do that. And I know that's a roundabout. We're not giving you any guidance at all on that request because I suppose I'm looking for a lolly scramble of options in terms of, pick that, which is not very helpful, I admit. But Maybe
Yeah,
it's too
look,
early
we
almost to do that. Maybe if this is a conversation for, February or March.
No, it would need to, like, that conversation kind of needs to happen now or on the 11th of December. I think what I'm hearing from you, Bernie, is that it's feeling really important to demonstrate to community the impact of what would need to change to get down from, let's say, 9% to 8%.
Yep.
And so we could certainly in that council report give some examples of those sorts of things and the impact that those would have. All I'm signalling is if councillors have some ideas, I'd rather that be talked about today, because if council want to pursue one of those ideas, and whether it be an idea that a staff member puts in the officer report or not, I just don't want it to be inferred that staff cherry-picked ideas, because that's not what happened in the long-term plan process, but that's what's been inferred about the burn mowing conversation. So I want elected members to be clear about the scope of those impacts that you're seeking to see.
Yeah, because I'm going to take a different view, Mayor Bernie, because I think at the previous workshop, that direction, that call about whether we wanted to go less than 9.9, that was on the table, and I remember Mike and Justin obviously suggested that they would like to see something much lower, and as would I, but my challenge to them was identify what it is that we're going to cut or get to, and that's the challenge, right? Is that there's nothing obvious that we can look to in order to bring that down. So while I don't really want to go out with a 9%, my position at the moment is we set a long-term plan. We set out and we considered a whole lot of options. We set it on a 9.9, and for me, that's 9.9 is the absolute max. And so, I'm looking at those 3 TBCs, and that's really going to impact on what that number is. And so even with those TBCs becoming firm numbers, my approach is 9.9 is the absolute max, because that's what we've committed to. That's what we've said we would do in the long-term plan, and now we just need to execute. And so if we can get under that 9.9, that's a bonus, but we shouldn't be, I don't think at this stage it's reasonable, or I haven't heard anything where we've got appetite for drastic cuts to services in order to get, say, 1 or 2%. But yeah, so that's where I say I think that 9.9, just execute the plan as we put it. Yes, if we can find some additional savings, great, but acknowledging that there's still some stuff we don't know yet. And it sucks, but yeah, I mean, because my argument would be, what's the point of the process we just went through with long-term plan, where we've signalled what the rates would be in year 2 and 3, because we've got to look at things on that long-term basis, not on just a year-by-year basis. So, that's where I'm sitting.
As far as I'm concerned, burn those carbon credits, every single last one of them, and an old car tyre on the village green if you must, but we need to realise that money. I mean, we're sitting around here talking about, should we sell this, should we sell that? I know I'm banging on about this, but we're over $150 million in debt, and we're staring down the barrel of a 10% rates increase. We don't have the luxury of those kind of pleasantries, to be frank, and I would invite councillors to consider when voting on adopting the climate change plan, I think next week, as to how actually necessary is that. But there are, as far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table. Burn anything to save some money, and whatever you can get that down to. And the grown-up world is, we can't baby our electorate along with, we did this and we did that. So it's way too stark for that kind of stuff. We're just plain broke. So come on.
I probably go along with Sam's sort of communication around those TBC costs, and until we know them, I suppose, is having that more of an informed decision. But for me, definitely 9.9% at the max, but I'm probably a little bit I would rather have a sustainable model, and if that's at 9.7%, I'd rather be there than trying to burn every last cost out of the business and then in 3 years' time having to address things again with a rates increase because what we're actually financially we're not in a sustainable sort of model. So yeah, it's probably looking at that slightly longer picture rather than the quick wins. If in fact it's going to cost us in the long term. But yeah, it's just trying to have that picture. But I totally get what Mike's saying. And probably it's probably trying to pick out 3 or 4 things that we can look at and help the community in some way within that sort of cost structure. Cindy, can you remind me if because I'm looking at those additional insurance costs, and I know what insurance, and I know in the households people are making decisions about what they now insure and what they don't. Have we done a roll down and dirty at any time about what we are insuring and what we're not, and is there advantage in looking at that again? If and I can't recall how deep we've gone on that. It might be that we've got to insure everything we got, but I know the households are looking at it. Perhaps we should be too in terms of minimising that.
We have in the last prior to this last renewal, which that has just been completed. We made decisions about increasing our excess. We did have relatively low excesses; those have been increased to 250,000 from 50 for a fair amount. Also, we did have some extra insurance layers on some of our infrastructure assets, which we scaled back as well. And also, we had a look at some of our parks and property assets and where some of our playgrounds, for example, are other assets that we would unlikely, in the event of a significant event, we would be unlikely to go and replace everything. Then we made decisions about not specifically insuring everything. That conversation was brought to the Risk and Assurance Committee to have an oversight on, just so that there was visibility on that. So definitely we have been doing that. I think in terms of our insurance, our infrastructure insurance has gone well. I think the impact in terms of our above ground assets and our material damage, professional indemnity, they've come in at around 10% increase from the prior year. A significant amount of that is due to the fact that we have the cost. They've done a risk-based look at our whole group of that is insured, and we're a member of 15 on our LAP program, so we're in a huge group that's insured together. And so in terms of maximising our benefit, Councillor Tamihana, we do have representatives that are professionals in that area travelling on behalf of that local government group to London to help put forward our case to hopefully maximise the value of the insurance that we can get. So we are doing everything we can in that space to try but the key thing, Councillor Branding, was around that question around cover. And yes, we are doing some things in that area, but there is more that could be done to progress that further, but then that takes on some risk for the council.
So just for me, like, what is the biggest risk to council? And then it's just like, what's the thing that keeps coming at us consistently the most, or is there not something? Is it quite broad range?
Really, the most significant thing in the insurance area is planning for the inevitable should it happen. in terms of making sure our infrastructure in the case of a significant event is insured. So ultimately, we might, in terms of maximizing the value out of insurance, that might not be there for a number of years, and then something happens, and yeah, so it is something you might not necessarily always get the value from. We'll have claims, for example, in the building consent area. If somebody isn't happy with the consent process, they make a claim against council, then that's some insurance that we can call on to help fund any claims that might occur for council. So claims like that will occur every day, or if there's minor damage to our buildings given something happened, but the most significant item is really around planning for the inevitable should it happen.
Jacinta, can I just ask for one thing that will get a sense of what it would take to model this, which is around the remissions? Because I already realise that the remission budget is under considerable pressure in terms of the cap that's been put on it. But what I would be interested in is looking at the remission that is for relating to, I forget the chapter or the section around those change of zone, where a property has a change of zoning, and so they're essentially upzoned, and there's a considerable increase in value, and whether if we introduced a time limit on the application of or availability of that remission for a property, so say it was 3 years or 5 years, something like that, whether that starts to have an impact and translates into any considerable saving in terms of remissions budget or not. It may be that it's just negligible, that it doesn't even shift the needle on this, but is there some thinking or some work that can be done around that just to kind of get a sense of what that number might look like in terms of, and whether there might be any benefit for us short term?
Yep, we're happy to do some work on that. Yep. I'm not sure of the benefit, what it would look like, but we can definitely have a look at it.
It could be 1,000, a couple of thousand, or it could be a couple of 100,000, but just going to get a sense.
Councillor Young, do you have a view there in terms of what your perspective on the rates increase is?
I'm quite happy with the cap at 9.9%, but I am also with Bernie in that I would love to explore some options as well.
Yeah, to me it's about us signalling what those options are. That's really where the rubber does hit the road, and so far, Mike's identified 150,000, which is the carbon credits. But if we're serious about this, we've got to identify some real tough options. It wasn't that long ago we went through the long-term plan process, as Sam's pointed out, and we had those tough discussions. And if we really want to make a difference, let's talk about community funding, $900,000 or whatever. But playing around the edges and saying, let's do 150 here, 50 there. At the end of the day, what benefit do we get in terms of the difference we've made to ratepayers' lives as a result of those savings versus the difference it's made to the bottom line with the rates? So to me, it sits squarely within that 9.9 ceiling, and that yet to be discovered, those additional costs. I think, we're going to have to be prepared for what that all means too. So there's no way I can move the line, honestly. And I really do put the challenge out, as councillors around the table, what do we want to forego in order to reduce the rates further? That's my question.
Jacinta, do we have any idea what, and it's got TBC, do we have any idea what that might look like?
At this stage, we're anticipating that we'll be able to manage it with the budgets that we have, so we're hoping not. We will know by the end of this week what that looks like, and we can email and let elected members know. The insurance is the one we really probably want to test specifically. Based on the conversation that I'm hearing, if, for example, the 9.2 and what we've talked about around through these last slides is acceptable to the table, and the carbon credits and the cleaning conversation was also acceptable, then that would get us into the 8.9 level of rates. So from that side, those are two options that just given what you've got here, but that doesn't assume you're going to make a decision about adding any more money in for burn mowing. So it would be good to signal that if there are some different, so if in general, is the table happy with what's there with the 9.2? I wasn't hearing a lot of objection to some of the conversations that we had earlier around some of the items that we plan to change in the 9.2 area. Is it worth you giving your views of additional options that you would like us to bring into the paper?
Perhaps while people are reflecting on that, the one thing that would be useful to get a sense of is what's the cost of consultation? Do we know that versus not consulting? Because, like, the part of the magic is not materially differing from what we've said we're going to do in the long-term plan in order to be able to be comfortable making a decision not to consult unless we change it significantly. And so if by not consulting, by not going too off script, and therefore that creates the opportunity not to consult, what's the cost saving that we make? And so what's the benefit? Because if it's $50,000 or $100,000 to go and consult on trying to save $200,000, like what's the point?
Oh, I'm just kind of trying to. We can come back to you with some information on that. Probably better than me trying to pull things together now. Great, we'll do that for you though.
Probably just to comment, I think there's two parts to that cost as well. Kara was probably about to start sort of trying to calculate what we might cost, the sort of direct cost in terms of advertising, running the events, hiring hawks, all that sort of stuff, which costs, but isn't a significant cost. But I think if Monique was to give an answer, she would be able to give you quite a big number in terms of the overhead cost of what it actually costs the organisation. And then I think you have to think about that in terms of what could be done what could be progressed or advanced if officers weren't involved and wrapped up in a consultation process associated with an annual plan. And it is quite a big number when you add in the officer hours at the overhead level.
Just a comment from me though. Even when I look at the vehicle expenses chart, I see it jumps up $60,000 in year 25. And then I ask myself, why is that? Because I know it's already planned to go ahead, but what's the reasoning for such a large jump in that year? And is that required? Is that just a mechanism of how we're using vehicles, or we're not using vehicles, or we're not? Yeah, I'm just wondering. For me, that 60-70k sitting there, what is it for? Overall potential budget impacts on. Sorry, it doesn't have numbers on the page, does it? It's above training and anyway, the next page. Not down, sorry. Vehicles, external interest, bank fees, insurance, weather.
Yeah, so Justin, that vehicle increase, that's a direct relation to us bringing Three Waters in-house. So historically, that you wouldn't have seen that cost because it would have come under, it would have either come under maintenance costs or general expenses because it's what we would have paid the contractor, but now we pay that instead of paying the contractor.
You're just confirming it's maintenance that it would sit under. Yeah. Okay, I think what we'll do is keep moving on.
Could I just test, sorry, Jacinta, I suppose what I'm hearing is at the least councillors would like to see that the report that comes to you on the 11th of December we might talk to some of the options that council have considered in the past, or any new obvious options that would allow council to get down from 9 to 8, but that we're doing that in a way, kind of as you described, Mayor Burney, it's because you're wanting to understand the impact of that.
Yeah, no, look, I'm comfortable with a report that says 9.9. I just want to, as I said, I suppose test what it would mean if we went lower, and I suppose that does mean just a blanket statement around what services are we not going to do, rather than specify particular service levels, because people, I think, have got the idea now that if we reduce rates, that it means that does have an impact on delivery of services. So as long as we're suggesting that we have looked at those other service delivery pieces that might impact rates, and we've decided no, that we're comfortable going out to the community at 9.9, I'm all right with that. So I don't want to certainly don't want any work done in terms of identifying if councillors haven't got those service delivery options now. We certainly don't want officers to, as you suggest, drive that.
Yeah, and I've heard that there's some different views around the table around how we might use the third part of the waste levy. Some people would rather see that still committed to waste minimisation projects rather than subsidising recycling. And then I've also heard that there's different views around the table around what we'd do with our carbon credits, i.e. whether we'd sell them or keep them. Were there any of those other ideas that we'd put in terms of to get it to 8.8, where there's not, putting aside burn mine, which is a decision to come from council, but was there anything on that slide or overall in terms of the work we've done to get it down from 11.6 where people are feeling uncomfortable about what we've said we'll cut to get there?
I think that's a general no. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably more those TBCs is probably where attention needs to be put.
For me, we've already set a precedence that we're going to explore other options by looking at burn mowing, so I think we have to explore all the other options associated with it as well to get the number down or up.
Okay, so that paper will include everything that we've described today. Will provide clarity on the 3 items that we have yet to provide clarity on there, and then mention the additional savings options that were included as part of the long-term plan, that were options that could be looked at again.
The only thing I was going to say is just it'd be nice to just be really clear about the work that Daniel's doing in terms of the solid waste stuff, because we might be able to give a clear steer on that waste levy line before Christmas, just if the timing lines up in terms of what the decision making and the workshopping looks like on that. Because like Justin and I think we're saying ring fence that for now until we know more, and so once we know more we might be able to shift that thinking depending on what we know. So is that, do we, Monique, I don't know if you're listening, but do you have an idea about when we might make those calls?
So we're on the 2nd of December, we're leading a workshop with council on the broader solid waste work program. And so the intent of that is to give councillors kind of the long-term big picture view as to the program and how, for example, WMMP lines up with things like contract reviews, Section 17A. So I don't think we'll have all the answers for you then, Sam, but I certainly think you'll get a feel for how that 220 27K could be spent if it was not to be subsidising recycling.
Thank you. Yeah, I think because whatever the steer is on that particular day, I know that the agenda will come out that day, but it might just be able to provide a little bit more clarity on that number.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is just intended to signal, I think we brought this in the last workshop, was that the inflation indices that are provided by Burrell have been updated. They are planned to increase, but what we've looked at our specific contract costs. Other than the one we've signaled that we're not sure of at the moment, we think we are comfortable to manage within the rates that were set for the long-term plan, rather than increase the indices at this stage, which would have been additional sort of $115,000. So we're happy to take that challenge on in terms of the increases for those indices. Then as well, in terms of the capital program, at this stage with the capital program that's planned for next year, we're still planning to continue on with the same level of capital program, but the decisions about whether there are continue to be any changes required between year 1 and year 3 of the long-term plan, we would look to come back to you after Christmas with that proposal. Whether there are any changes, we're not planning to change the overall level across the 3 years at all, but there may be some timing changes needed with the capital projects, and so we are proposing to come back to you after Christmas with that in one of the early workshops, if that's okay with the table. So just in terms of what that looks like, we had $35 million for 2024. 25 is 44, and it's planned to be 47 million for next financial year. Highlighting what that debt picture looks like for us, and signaling that just what I mentioned earlier is that there is currently 10 million in debt headroom available in 25-26. So continues to be quite tight, and we'll continue to manage it closely with you as we move forward. Now, this next stage of the presentation has got lots of detail. We're not planning to go into that detail with you and through each of the slides. Overall, what we've done with our fees and charges is looked at them. We've increased them by the average rates that are set out within Burrell. Fees have been rounded to the nearest 50 cents for fees $10 and above, and the rest are rounded to the nearest 10 cents. Where there are exceptions to the Burrell inflation rates, we have described those for you in the presentation, and as part of the full fees and charges schedule will be provided to you in the paper that goes forward before Christmas. But the next slides will go through in detail all of any new fees that have been proposed, and also any changes in fees that have been proposed where things are slightly outside of where the cost adjusters should be based on Burrell. So in general, the indices sit at around 2.5% to 4%, depending on the different activity, and that's what the fees have been based on. So there are a bunch of new fees in different parts of the activity, given some of the activities that we're working on. But I don't know that we need to go through them in detail. I'm happy to if the table would like to, but what I was proposing to do is leave them with you so that you can work through them in detail, and then if anyone's got any questions, you can come back to us with an email, and we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit early. What I'd like to see at some stage is the impact that we had with increasing fees last year, and whether our revenue assumptions are different now. And my first reaction at seeing only 50%, why aren't we raised to the nearest dollar if they're over 10% rather than 50 cents? So, but just understanding the impact of what we did last year in terms of, that modelling is it still working? And by increasing them it won't have a significant impact in terms of people's response, if you like. What I probably want to understand is, has there been a reaction to increased fees in terms of some of those things that we've delivered?
Does anyone in the particular area that's in the gallery want to make any particular comments around fees and charges and where they've sat for their areas and whether there are any challenges they'd like to talk about with the table?
Especially bags, I'd be keen to understand that one.
Yeah, rubbish bags is the one I would flag. And you'll see that we've had to drop our revenue assumption for next year because we are seeing a decrease in purchasing of bags. I don't know if David McMillan's in the room to talk to that.
Yes, I'm here. So yeah, there was quite a dip in the sales. That was quite expected because as soon as you put the price up, people will go elsewhere. So I guess it's up to the floor to decide which is the best way to remedy that, whether to go down and try and recapture the market or just carry on with either the current price or raise the price.
So, David, the question would be, what percentage drop have you seen in terms of the revenue compared to where it was? Is our revenue less or has it stayed the same?
Oh, our revenue has dramatically declined. It's a bit of a nosedive. It's probably, at the moment, it's a little hard to tell because it's only early days, but it's well over 20% reduction.
Jacinta, I'm pretty sure on the earlier slide where we identify the amount of money that we're forecasting we won't receive in revenue. And that's based on our projections to date, based on the impact of rubbish bags.
So my question around this would be, and I don't want us to waste the whole time, but did we see a revenue jump before the price increase came into being? The price increase came to be implemented, because what that would suggest is that people were stocking up on them, and that we're still in that period, right? And so, because that's what would tell us is if actually there is this genuinely a decrease in demand versus what does the pattern actually look like long term in terms of a revenue assumption. So I'd be intrigued so that last quarter, what was the revenue received for bags higher than previous years? Because I think that is part of the picture.
What we can commit to, Sam, is a follow-up email to elected members on what are we noticing, what are some options, and pick up on your particular question about what did we see at the end of the financial year.
The other thing just on these fees is just a little bit more info again by follow-up email around what we're expecting to see in terms of revenue for, given Three Waters is now in-house. I understand we're going to be doing more wastewater and water connections, so that revenue will be, and that work's currently done by the private sector, and so that revenue will now be coming into council probably at a lower rate, so it's on a cost recovery basis. But what does that revenue look like in terms of an additional assumption?
Thanks. That one in particular, I think the team are seeking a little bit more time on to be able to estimate appropriately. That is in progress, but they're not quite comfortable yet. Otherwise, they would have put a number forward into the annual plan, but they're very aware of it. And in terms of the conversation I'm hearing about fees, when we come forward for the paper in December, we will look to include an assessment of revenue historically and what's forecast forward by activity area, so you can get a sense of where our fees and charges are tracking. That hopefully will answer a bunch of the questions that have been asked today around revenue, if that works. Okay, I'm going to flick forward to the part where Caro, to the next steps portion, and pass over to Caro.
Great, thank you. So just drawing together some of the pieces of where we are at. In the next fortnight, we'll be taking the direction that you've given us and following up to prepare for the council paper for the 11th of December, subject to any other decisions that are made at the council meeting next week. This process, it does run alongside the fees and charges, so as discussed, the paper will have the two parts to it. We will then take the decision from that 11th of December meeting to prepare communications to ratepayers, whether we are consulting or whether we are not consulting, depending on that decision. And we would be looking, if we weren't consulting, say to have information out to ratepayers approximately the end of February, start of March, we'd be looking to have the rates calculator ready, and that's our timeline for getting that ready and tested so people can see the impacts of that. There are some fees and charges that would need consulting on, so it would be a smaller consultation, quite targeted, and we could get that running as well. As mentioned, there'll be a capital workshop early in the new year, so we'd take information from that to finalise budgets in February and March. These dates are based on not consulting. End of April, we would expect to share the draft annual plan with council. And we're working around that third week of April where it's the end of Easter, Anzac Day, so making sure that we work that into our planning. And then for the 14th of May, looking to adopt the annual plan and fees and charges at that stage. Adopting fees and charges earlier as we did this year, so that enabled time to get notices out to people and to have all the changes made in time for the website. And looking to strike the rates in June to account for the most growth that we have and ensure that's all there. So that's our plan.
Can I just ask a procedural question, I suppose? If we decide not to consult, is there a sort of a, thing where we can actually engage community and maybe a hearings type situation to listen to what they want to say at some stage? I just wonder, I'm just conscious that we're going from one extreme to the other almost. Saying, sorry, you two, we've already decided everything for you. This is what the plan is and we're not deviating. But not that things will change, but the opportunity to at least listen to them and say what they want to tell us. So I'm just, throwing something out in a ball in the air, basically.
Would there be potentially like a forum or coming to?
To get those that want to turn up and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it.
Could we just extend the public forum? Extend your public forum instead of half an hour, make it now.
Council could think about doing something innovative like a roadshow where you actually go out into the different towns and villages, and I suppose it's an opportunity for people to talk to you, but maybe also an opportunity for council to showcase some of the work it actually does. So we could give you advice in the report, Mayor Burney, about options like that and options like doing public forum.
Well, yeah, I know it is, but then we're telling our community they've got no say at all, and at least getting some feedback from them in terms of where you're heading, what you're doing, I think is important.
I know we skipped over a whole lot of stuff, but I am interested what was in the second part of some of your report around the fees and that. Some of the things in there I didn't know we were doing, like a researcher, new role coming in there. I suppose I just want to pick up on the comment around the price increase around rubbish bags, and that, that for me is a lesson learned. And I hope we apply that lesson across other spectrums of things we're doing, because I'm sitting here looking at aquatics going a 75% increase in a MoveWell single entry fee. The last thing we want to be doing is pricing people out of using our facilities. We need to find ways and pricing structures that actually accommodate our people, encourage our families to use those facilities. We would want high turnover of people, not low turnover, high cost, because we're just pushing people away from using our facilities. The library, I don't even know what a fee is for a library today. What do you pay to use our library, and is there a fee? I have just no idea. I've never seen one come through in the time I've been here, but how are we supporting that business if people have lifelong library cards? Well, what does that mean? It's just, I've got a library card that I've had since I was 13 years old. So, what are we actually doing to encourage people using these facilities? How are we incentivizing people and families to use our facilities? Technology is one thing, but I know kids now that have no idea how to use a library. So I'm just thinking about things like that. Let's not be hasty when we make decisions and then end up shooting ourselves in the foot down the track. I think there's many lessons this council have learnt over time, but we don't seem to pick up on them and carry them forward. So that's just for all of us to consider. Kia ora.
Councillor Tamihana, I'm happy to answer the first part of your question, and I could probably help a bit of an explanation in the second part. The MoveWell on that slide, in particular around those classes, has been an opportunity to spread that out following a bit of a business review, understanding the cost that we are making for those classes. So we've done a bit of work to understand actually we're not making money, so at least cutting even. So for the cost that it costs us to run that class, that particular class, that MoveWell class that you refer to, yeah, it is a 75% increase, noting that the monetary value is an extra $1.50 to climb up, and that is to break even on that class. That class in particular is quite a small class in terms of participants, hence why it's got that slight jump. But take your point that when we've been looking at those costs to take part in those classes, is trying to strike that balance of absolutely making it affordable for members of our community to come, but at the same time listening to the table and making sure that we are cutting even so that we're recovering our costs. And the second part to your comment around libraries and facilities in general, I think you were referring to, is absolutely take on board that the team try their best to promote all of the services that we offer in our facilities. I won't go into detail, but there's actually some really cool stuff coming up in the next 6 to 12 months about being quite innovative with actually in particular how people approach our libraries by way of actually an app. But there's some other great stuff that is in the pipeline. But take your point around, how do we make sure that people are getting the most out of our library and community centres, noting that in the library fees and charges, we are actually proposing zero increase in a lot of those charges to make it approachable so people can actually engage with our libraries. So I hope I've probably haven't answered all your questions, Councillor Tamihana, but just to give a bit of context for you.
Just quickly on that research one as well, the reason that fee is proposed to be introduced is typically we do a lot of work for people through the Goimas, but there have been some quite significant research requests where teams are taking weeks to do work on behalf of some of those people that are seeking the research, and it's just to make sure that they're paying their share towards the cost of staff time to be spent on significant research. So it's not intending to unfairly disadvantage standard questions, but it is for significant research projects that people are doing.
I think I appreciate that, and for me, it's probably when it's like that, it can be quite a broad brush and be applied anywhere, anyhow. And I think maybe it needs to be a little bit more defined for me in terms of how that is used, exactly as you explained, because otherwise it doesn't mean much to me.
Okay, in terms of this next part then, just to highlight again, please, when you go through them, and thanks for the questions we've had so far, just email them through to Democracy and we'll make sure that we address any questions. If there are a significant number of questions, then we could look to wrap them up and discuss them at a section of a future briefing, if that's useful, or a future workshop. Does that work for the table in terms of wrapping that up? Okay. Well, thank you for your time and your contribution.
Thanks, Jacinta. Thanks, Pashana. Thanks, Caro.
Is that it for the annual plan? That's it? Okay. Right, cool. So we have not due to have NZTA until 4 p.m. Right. I'm not sure. Did you want to? We can do that now. Yeah. We'll just have a couple minute break. Maybe we can talk by car with Brent. Yep.